At 26, Maya Calloway walked out of her fiancé's office with a termination letter, a broken engagement, and one asset his lawyers didn't bother fighting for, a forgotten clock shop in a town nobody remembered. What she found inside changed everything. Subscribe so you don't miss where this goes. Nashville in October smells like coffee and cold rain and the particular kind of ambition that never fully sleeps. Maya Calloway had lived in this city for 4 years, and she still felt a small charge every morning when she walked into the agency on Fifth Avenue. The clean lines of the office, the hum of creative work being done, the sense that she was exactly where a 26-year-old with a graphic design degree and something to prove was supposed to be. She had built her portfolio from nothing. She had poured herself in every logo, every brand identity, every campaign that came across her desk. She had also, along the way, fallen in love with the man who signed her paychecks, which she would later understand was the first of several mistakes she made during those years, though it hadn't felt like a mistake at the time. Brandon Holt was 34, sharp, handsome in the way that men with good suits and precise haircuts often are, and he had a gift for making the people around him feel chosen. Maya had felt exactly that for 3 years before she understood what the feeling was worth. She had accepted his proposal on a Tuesday evening in April, on the roof of their shared apartment, with the Nashville skyline lit up behind him and a ring that caught the light in a way that made her breath catch. She had told herself the feeling in her chest was happiness. It was close enough that she hadn't questioned it. The morning of October 9th, Brandon asked her to come into his office before the rest of the team arrived. He was already seated when she walked in. 2 envelopes sat on the desk between them like a pair of closed doors. The first contained a termination of employment, effective immediately, citing a vague restructuring clause she had signed in her first week on the job when she was too grateful to read carefully. The second was a notice of intent to dissolve their engagement, prepared by a lawyer whose name she didn't recognize. Brandon explained it calmly, the way he explained quarterly projections, measured, organized, already decided. He had met someone. This was the right thing for both of them. He hoped she would see that eventually. Maya sat in the chair across from the man she had planned to marry in 22 days and noticed, with a strange detached clarity, that there were no photographs of her anywhere in his office. There never had been. She signed what she was asked to sign. She picked up her cardboard box from the front desk. Someone had already packed it, which told her the decision had not been recent, and she walked out into the gray October morning. She sat in her car for a long time without starting the engine. The following day, a third document arrived by courier. Brandon's legal team had registered the copyright on her entire design portfolio under the company's name 6 months prior, using a clause in her employment contract she had never thought to question. Every logo, every campaign, every piece of work she had created in 3 years belonged, on paper, to him. At the bottom of the asset summary, in small print near the end, was a single line she almost missed. Real property, Hargrove Clock & Co., 14 Main Street, Millhaven, TN. Estimated value, negligible. His lawyers hadn't bothered to contest it. His advisor's note in the margin read, rural property, no commercial value. Maya stared at that line for a long time. She had been to Millhaven exactly once when she was 6 years old. She remembered almost nothing about it, except a room full of clocks and a man who smelled like machine oil and old wood and spoke to her like her questions mattered. She had $340 in her checking account, a laptop, a box of clothes, and an address in East Tennessee. She started the car. The interstate gave way to highway, and highway gave way to county road. And by the time Maya reached Route 11, the sun was already low, and the sky had gone the color of a bruise fading at the edges. East Tennessee in October was nothing like Nashville. The hills rose up on both sides of the road, dark and close, their trees stripped nearly bare, the last of the leaves clinging in patches of copper and rust against the gray. The temperature had been dropping since Cookville, and her heater worked only intermittently, blowing warm for 10 minutes and then going cold without warning. She had her coat pulled tight across her chest and the radio tuned to a country station that kept cutting to static through the mountain passes. Millhaven sat in a shallow valley between 2 low ridges, small enough that she almost missed the turn. Main Street was 4 blocks long, a hardware store, a diner with a lit window, a church at the far end with a gravel parking lot, and a handful of shops that had been holding on through sheer stubbornness for years. She found 14 Main Street on the second pass. Hargrove Clock & Co. occupied the corner of Main and Depot Road, a 2-story brick building, red gone dark with age and weather, surviving on the quality of its original construction. The sign above the door was hand-painted wood, the letters faded to ghosts. A section of the gutter on the left side had broken free and hung at an angle. Ivy had climbed to the bottom edge of the second-floor windows. One of those windows had a cracked pane sealed with old tape that had dried and curled back from the edges. Maya stood on the front step with the key from the estate folder, tried it in the lock twice before it caught, and pushed the door open into the dark. The smell hit her first, machine oil and old wood, and something underneath that she couldn't name, the accumulated scent of decades of careful work. She found the light switch, and a single overhead bulb came on, yellowed and dim, casting long shadows across the floor. Along 3 walls stood display cases and shelving units, and on every surface sat clocks, mantel clocks and wall clocks and table clocks and small pocket watches resting in velvet-lined boxes. Dozens of them, maybe more. She stood very still in the middle of the room and listened, ticking. From every direction, soft and layered, steady as breathing. The sound of all those clocks running at once. Maya pressed her hand flat against the nearest display case. The vibration was faint but real. Someone had been maintaining these clocks, winding them, replacing batteries, keeping them running for 8 years after George Hargrove died. There was no note, no name, no explanation, just the ticking, filling the dim room like something alive. She found the staircase at the back and climbed to the apartment above. The bedroom wall had a dark water stain that ran from the corner of the ceiling nearly to the floor, the plaster beneath it soft and crumbling. The floor in that corner had buckled and gone gray. The furnace cover was cold to the touch. She tried the thermostat and heard nothing respond. The kitchen window didn't close flush, and the wind came through the gap in a thin, steady stream that made the overhead light sway. She checked the thermometer nailed to the porch railing outside. 38 degrees and dropping. Maya went back downstairs, found the thickest blanket in the hall closet. Thin wool, old, smelling of cedar, dragged the armchair from the corner behind the display case closest to the brick wall, and sat down in the middle of all those ticking clocks with her coat still on. The brick held a faint residual warmth from the day. She pulled the blanket over her legs and sat there for a while, not thinking, just listening to the sound that had somehow kept running without her. She woke to pale light and the sound of ticking, and the particular disorientation of a room she didn't yet know by heart. The armchair had left a crick in her neck. The brick wall behind her had gone cold overnight. She found coffee in the kitchen cabinet, a sealed can, stale but not ruined, and heated water in a dented saucepan on the 2-burner stove, which caught on the 3rd try. She carried the mug downstairs and began to look at things properly in the morning light. The largest clock cabinet stood against the east wall, floor-to-ceiling, mahogany gone dark with age. When Maya leaned her shoulder into the side of it to examine a gouge in the baseboard, she felt it shift, not loose, just not fixed to the wall. She got her fingers behind the edge and pulled steadily. The cabinet swung out 6 inches and stopped. Behind it, set into the wall and covered by a panel of thin wood fitted flush into the plaster, was a shallow recess. She pried the panel away with her thumbnail. Inside, a notebook with a navy blue cover, soft and worn at the corners. A white envelope, sealed, with a single word on the front in careful block letters. Maya, written in the shaking hand of someone old or ill or both. A small USB drive in a plastic sleeve. Maya took the notebook to the counter and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was even and neat, slanting slightly right, dated January 1999. She read slowly, the coffee going cold beside her. Because the notebook was not a financial record and not a business log, it was a record of people. Every entry named someone in Millhaven. A clock repaired for free because the husband had just lost his job. A loan of $500 to keep a family's heat on through a February cold snap. A bag of groceries left in a truck bed after dark. 25 years of entries, each one specific and quiet. each one a transaction that had never been meant to balance. Near the middle of the notebook, she turned a page and stopped. Louisville Children's Home, March 2002. A girl, age 4. Staff said she'd been sitting in the corner by herself all day, not crying, just watching. I asked her what she liked. She pointed at the wall clock and asked if it was broken. I told her no, it just ran slower than the others. She nodded very seriously and said, "Running slow doesn't mean broken." I went home and filed the adoption paperwork that afternoon. Maya read the entry again, then a third time. She had spent 26 years believing George Hargrove had taken her in out of kindness, out of some general goodness of character that had nothing specific to do with her. She had not known that she had said something at 4 years old that had changed the direction of a man's life. She set the notebook down carefully on the counter and looked at the room around her, the clocks, the display cases, the pegboard on the back wall with its rows of small tools hanging in precise order, and felt the particular vertigo of realizing the ground beneath a story she thought she knew had shifted. She kept reading. Toward the back, a series of entries dated between 2015 and 2019, quarterly contributions to something called the Millhaven Elementary Maintenance Fund, $200 at a time, without exception, until the entry stopped in the fall of 2019. A note in the margin in pencil, the handwriting shakier than the earlier entries. If the school closes, this town dies one family at a time. Outside the window, the sky had gone the flat white of a cold day with no sun. Maya put on a second layer, went back to the notebook, and kept reading. The knock came on the third morning, just after 8, 3 slow raps on the glass panel of the front door. Maya had been awake for an hour, crouched in front of the furnace panel with her phone flashlight and a YouTube tutorial paused at the 3-minute mark, trying to understand whether the ignition module was the problem or something deeper in the system. She was still in her coat. Her breath had been faintly visible in the kitchen that morning. She opened the door and found a woman in her early 70s, standing on the step in rubber boots and a wool coat the color of old moss, holding a cast iron pot by its handle with both hands. Her hair was white and cut close. Her face was deeply lined in the way of someone who had spent most of her life outdoors and had not minded. She looked at Maya for a long moment with the calm appraisal of someone who had been expecting this visit and had simply been waiting for it to arrive. "You're George's girl," the woman said. It was not a question. "Dottie Sims. I live 2 houses down. I brought potato soup." Her name was in the notebook. 3 entries, spanning 15 years. A clock repaired, a loan forgiven, a winter heating bill quietly covered. She set the pot on the counter and produced 2 spoons from her coat pocket, while Maya found bowls, and they sat at the counter in the gray morning light eating soup while the clocks ticked around them. Maya asked the question she had been carrying since the first night. "The clocks," she said. "Somebody's been winding them, maintaining them." "For 8 years, Dottie set her spoon down. That was me," she said. "Every Monday morning. George gave me a key before he went into the hospital the last time. He said, 'Don't let them stop.' I didn't ask why. I just came." Maya looked at her across the counter. This woman who had walked into a cold, empty building every Monday morning for 8 years to wind the clocks of a dead man because he had asked her to, and felt something give way in her chest that she hadn't known was held tight. "He fixed my wedding clock in 1987, Dottie said. "It had a cracked bezel, should have been thrown out. He worked on it 3 days and didn't charge me $1. Said a good clock shouldn't be allowed to stop." She picked her spoon back up. I figured that applied to him too, even after. When Dottie left, she set a spare key on the counter without being asked. "In case you lock yourself out," she said. Then, at the door, she paused and looked back at the furnace panel, still hanging open across the room. She did not say anything. But the following morning, she arrived with Pastor Dale Whitfield from Millhaven Baptist, a broad man in his late 50s, with a mechanic's hands and a minister's patience, and 2 men from the church congregation, both carrying toolboxes. They did not ask permission. They did not discuss payment. They looked at the furnace and got to work. By early afternoon, heat was moving through the building for the first time in years, slow at first, tentative, and then settling into a steady warmth that spread from room to room like something returning to itself. Maya stood in the kitchen doorway and felt it reach her and did not trust herself to say anything at all. The repairs continued through the first 2 weeks of November. Pastor Dale came back twice with different men from the congregation, and each time Maya tried to understand how to thank them, they deflected with a story about George. A clock repaired on a Sunday when the shop should have been closed, a bill quietly paid, an hour of listening on a Tuesday afternoon when a man had needed to say something out loud to another person. The cracked window in the upstairs bedroom was replaced with new glass by a man named Ted Haskins, who said George had once lent him his truck for a week without being asked. The water stain on the bedroom wall was traced to a failed seal around the window frame, cut out, dried, and resealed by two men whose names Maya wrote down and couldn't stop thinking about afterward. The buckled floorboards were planed flat, and the kitchen window re-hung on its frame, and the draft went quiet. Dottie came every morning and left something: soup, bread, pie, once just a hand-knitted scarf she set on the counter without comment. Maya took Eli's truck into the lot on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-November. She had gone to the hardware store at the end of Main Street for weather stripping and was crossing back when she heard the engine before she saw it, a blue-green pickup, early 2000s, coughing badly as it turned onto Main Street and losing power by the time it reached the front of the shop. It rolled to a stop at the curb and the driver climbed out. He was 29, lean, wearing a flannel shirt and faded green plaid with old oil on the right sleeve, and he opened the hood with the practiced motion of someone who had done it many times on many roadsides. His name, she would learn, was Eli Marsh. He had a spare belt in the truck bed, but no tools. Maya told him she had tools. He followed her into the shop and stopped in the doorway. When he saw the sign above the counter, he read it twice. Something shifted in his face. Not recognition exactly, but the expression of a person placing a piece they hadn't known they were missing. George Hargrove taught me to repair clocks, he said slowly. I was 15. 3 summers. I broke more than I fixed. He never once got frustrated. He looked at Maya then, really looked at her, the kind of look people give when they're reassessing what they thought they were walking into. I'm his daughter, Maya said. He adopted me when I was 4. Eli was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful. He talked about you, he said. He said he had a daughter who lived in the city. He said he hoped she'd come back someday. They replaced the belt in the fading afternoon light, working in a companionable quiet that felt easier than conversation. When the truck was running again, Eli leaned against the hood and looked at the shop front. You need someone who knows the mechanical side, he said. It wasn't quite an offer. I need a lot of things, Maya said. Come back tomorrow if you want to talk about it. Coffee's on at 7. He nodded once and drove off down Main Street. Maya watched his taillights disappear and went back inside to finish installing the weather stripping on the front door before the temperature dropped again. Eli came back at 7:15 the following morning, and they talked for an hour over coffee about what the shop needed and what he knew how to do, and by 8 o'clock, he had started sorting through the unclaimed repairs that had been sitting in the back room since George died. Maya went upstairs and opened her laptop and plugged in the USB drive she had been carrying in her jacket pocket for 3 weeks without opening it. There was one file inside, a video, 11 minutes and 47 seconds long, named simply, For Maya, When You're Ready. She pressed play. George Hargrove sat at his workbench in the shop below. She recognized the pegboard behind him, the velvet tools, the particular quality of light from the east windows in the morning. He was thinner than she remembered from the last time she had seen him, his face more drawn. But his eyes were steady, and his hands, resting on the bench beside the clock he'd been working on when he decided to record this, were still. He talked about the shop. Most people who brought a clock to be repaired didn't really come about the clock, he said. They came because they needed to sit somewhere quiet with someone who would listen. He had spent 25 years learning to be that person. And he wasn't sure it was something you could teach, but he thought it might be something you could inherit. His voice slowed near the end. I know about Brandon, he said. Not because you told me. You never told me anything hard. You kept it inside, like a watch with the mainspring wound too tight. He's not a bad man, Maya. He's just someone who measures everything in dollars and thinks that's the same as knowing what things are worth. He paused. This shop isn't worth much on paper, but it's worth everything to the people it's for. Don't sell it. Keep the clocks running. And make the coffee strong. People in this town don't drink weak coffee. Then he reached off camera and brought into frame a small silver pocket watch, open-faced. Its hands stopped at 11:47. She looked at the watch for a long moment. 11:47, the same numbers as the video file. She didn't know whether that was intention or coincidence, and she wasn't sure it mattered either way. This doesn't belong to me, he said. A man named Walter Holt brought it in 2009. He needed money fast and wanted to sell it. I paid him $400, more than it was worth to most people, because it was his grandfather's, and it came back from the war, and I couldn't let it leave permanently. I promised him I'd keep it for his family. If you can find the Holts, give it back to them. He set the watch down gently and looked back at the camera. I chose you because of something you said when you were 4 years old. You'll find it in the notebook. I spent 25 years trying to live up to it. The screen went dark. Maya sat with the laptop open and the room around her quiet. Downstairs, faint and steady, she could hear the ticking. She picked up the envelope with her name on it, the one she had been saving, and opened it. The letter inside was one page, written on yellow legal paper in George's careful block print. The first line read, I found you because you told me that running slow doesn't mean broken. You were 4 years old, and you taught me the most important thing I ever learned. I spent 25 years applying it to everyone who walked through that door. That is the only thing I have to leave you. Not the shop, not the clocks, just the way of seeing. Maya folded the letter back into the envelope and held it against her chest with both hands. Outside the window, the November sky was the flat pale gray of a day with no sun and no wind, and the town below was very quiet, and somewhere downstairs, George Hargrove's clocks were still keeping time. December came to Millhaven the way it comes to small Tennessee towns tucked against the ridgeline, not all at once, but gradually, the temperature dropping a degree or two each week, until one morning you looked at the thermometer on the porch railing, and it read 24, and the world had gone white and silent overnight. The first real snow fell on a Tuesday, light and dry, covering the rooftops along Main Street and settling in the grooves of the hand-painted sign above the shop door. Maya watched it from the upstairs window with a mug of coffee and felt something she couldn't immediately name, not happiness, not quite comfort, but the specific sensation of being in the right place during a hard season, which is its own kind of steadiness. Eli had moved into the spare room upstairs by the second week of December. It had come about the way practical things came about in that building without announcement. Dottie had mentioned in passing one morning, while Maya was restocking the coffee, that Eli had been sleeping in his truck since mid-October because his lease had ended and he hadn't found a place that made sense on what he was earning. Maya had looked at the spare room that afternoon, the one with the repaired floorboards and the new window seal, and the following morning she told Eli it was there if he needed it, that there was a lock on the door, and the arrangement was a business one, and he could pay the same weekly amount toward utilities that he would have put toward a room at the motel on Route 11. He had nodded once and moved in 2 days later with a duffel bag and a toolbox. He arrived downstairs before Maya most mornings, lit the furnace, and started the first pot of coffee. He had brought from a storage unit a small braided rug for the kitchen floor and laid it down without comment one afternoon, and Maya had noticed it and not said anything, which felt like the right response. He enrolled in an online mechanical certification program and studied at George's workbench. After the shop closed, his composition notebook filling with careful diagrams and notes in handwriting that had a similar forward slant to the entries in George's notebook. When Maya mentioned this, he shrugged and said good handwriting was good handwriting. The Saturday classes had grown to 14 students by mid-December. They sat around George's work tables with donated laptops and composition books, and Eli taught basic mechanical principles while Maya taught design software. And Tommy Briggs, 11 years old and serious as a judge, had produced a logo for the school's basketball team that was genuinely good, and Maya had told him so without qualification, and he had tucked it away with the practiced discomfort of someone who didn't yet know what to do with honest praise. Dottie hosted Thanksgiving that year in the small living room of her house 2 doors down, with a wood-burning stove and mismatched chairs and a table that seated 12 people, only if everyone committed to being close. Pastor Dale and his wife, Carol Brennan from the diner, Eli, 2 families from the congregation, and Maya. Somebody had strung paper turkeys along the mantel. The wood stove made the room smell like pine smoke, and the turkeys smelled like 3 days of preparation. And it was the loudest, most crowded room Maya had been in since leaving Nashville. And she sat between Dottie and a woman named Helen Griggs, whose husband fixed the gutter on the east side of the shop and thought, this is what I was missing. Not that house, not that ring, not those quarterly projections. This. She did not say it out loud. She didn't need to. By Christmas, the apartment above the shop had become, in the particular quiet way that spaces do, a home, not renovated or decorated, not made over, just returned to itself. Warm, functional, smelling of coffee and machine oil and the cedar from the old quilt that still lived on the armchair downstairs. A wreath of dried holly hung on the front door. On Christmas Eve, Dottie brought chili, and they ate it in the shop by lamplight while snow fell on Millhaven and the clocks ticked around them, and nobody needed to say that it was enough because it clearly was. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in January, slipping through the mail slot and landing on the floor while Maya was at the counter doing the previous week's accounts. She recognized the law firm's return address before she recognized Brandon's name in the header. She picked it up, put it on the counter, and finished her coffee before she opened it. The letter informed her that she was in violation of the intellectual property rights registered to Holt Creative Group, and that her use of design elements developed during her employment. Specifically, the logo she had created for the shop, the class materials, the new signage, constituted unauthorized use of proprietary methods and visual language. She was asked to cease use of all such materials immediately. If she did not comply, they would pursue legal action. Maya read the letter twice, then set it on the counter beside George's reading glasses. Outside, Main Street was glazed with a thin sheet of morning ice that caught the flat January light and threw it back in pieces. Eli was crunching across it with the ice scraper, his breath in short white puffs, clearing the front step and the strip of sidewalk along the shop front. She watched him work without seeing him. She did not have a lawyer. She did not have the money for a lawyer. The accounts she had just been reviewing were careful and lean. Eli's wages, fuel for the furnace, coffee and supplies, the certification program. There was nothing spare. She put the letter in the drawer beneath the counter, unlocked the front door, and opened the shop at 7, as she did every morning. Dottie arrived at 8, as she did every morning, and saw the drawer, not quite closed, and the particular set of Maya's shoulders, and said nothing for 10 minutes. Then she said, "Priya Lawson." Maya looked up. She's a lawyer. Retired from full practice, but she still takes cases she believes in. Lives on Orchard Street since 2022. Maya waited. Dottie refilled her own coffee. Her father lost his job in 2009 and couldn't make rent for 4 months. George covered the difference, $2,500. No interest, no timeline. Her father paid it back $50 a month over 3 years. George never brought it up again. She set the carafe down. I have her number. Priya Lawson arrived the following afternoon. 32 years old, dark-haired, in a charcoal wool coat with a leather briefcase worn soft at the corners. She read the letter at the counter, without sitting down, asked Maya 3 questions. Did she have the original files? Were there metadata timestamps? Had she signed anything after the first employment contract that expanded the IP clause? And then looked at Maya with the focused calm of someone who has already done the relevant math in her head. Maya opened her laptop and turned it toward Priya. Priya leaned in and studied the screen without touching it. This file has a creation date of March 8th, 2021, she said. What date did you sign your employment contract? Maya pulled up the scanned copy from her email. March 15th. Priya was quiet for a moment. If that date holds up, and I'll need to pull the actual registration filing from the Copyright Office to confirm, he registered work that predates his legal claim to it under that contract. That's potentially fraudulent registration, not just a contract dispute. It changes the nature of the case significantly. She straightened and buttoned her coat. I want to review the full contract language and the registration filing before I tell you what I think the exposure is. Give me a few days. She left her card on the counter next to George's reading glasses. Don't respond to the letter. Don't destroy anything. I'll call you by Friday. She walked back out into the cold. The ice had mostly gone from Main Street by the last week of January, though it still clung in the shadows along the north side of the buildings and in the grooves between the old brick pavers near the church. The daytime temperature had climbed back into the mid-30s, and the sky was doing the particular thing it does in the Tennessee hills in late winter, not quite blue, not quite gray, a pale indeterminate color that held the cold without advertising it. Maya was inside running a Saturday class when she heard the engine, deep and smooth, the sound of something expensive maintaining its power effortlessly. She knew it before she looked. Brandon's silver SUV pulled into the space in front of the shop, and he stepped out in a heavy wool coat, hands in pockets, and stood looking at the building, the way he looked at every building, evaluating its bones, calculating its potential, deciding before he'd seen the inside whether it was worth his time. Maya excused the class 15 minutes early. She met him on the step. He looked at the freshly painted sign, the replaced window glass, the clean brick around the door frame where the old caulking had been ground out and redone. Looks better than I expected, he said. You drove 3 hours in January to tell me that? He didn't answer that directly. He said he had come because he thought they could settle this before Priya Lawson put it in front of a judge. He said the case would be long and expensive, and neither of them needed it. Maya looked at him, the press coat, the careful composure, the particular way he framed things as reasonable that were not reasonable, and felt something she hadn't expected. Not anger exactly, and not grief, but the clean, settled clarity of someone who has walked far enough away from a place to see it plainly for the first time. Withdraw the claim, she said. Cancel the registration. That's what needs to happen. He was about to answer when his eyes moved past her to the shop window. She watched his expression change, the composure going suddenly still, the calculation behind his eyes replaced by something she had never seen on his face before. That watch, he said quietly, in the case on the counter. Does the front have a small engraved eagle? Maya turned. Through the glass, she could see the silver pocket watch in its display case, open-faced, hands stopped at 11:47. Yes, she said. His voice, when he spoke, was different from any version of his voice she had heard in 3 years. My grandfather's name was Walter Holt, he said. He died in 2010. He never told anyone he sold it. We found out from a single line in his personal ledger after the estate was settled. No name, no location, just the amount and the date. We've been trying to trace it since then. Maya thought of George's video. He needed money fast. 2009, I promised I'd keep it for his family. 2009. The year the market collapsed. The year a lot of families in a lot of small towns quietly sold what they loved to stay afloat. She went inside, opened the display case, and carried the watch out. She placed it in Brandon's hands without conditions and without commentary. He turned it over. The back bore an engraving in a pre-war script, a name and a date, and a regiment number. His hands, holding it, were not entirely steady. He stood on the step of a clock shop in Millhaven, Tennessee, in the cold last light of a January afternoon, holding something a stranger had promised to keep for him before he existed. For once, he had nothing to say. After a while, he looked up. His expression had not gone soft exactly. It was something closer, to the face of a man recalculating, which was the only version of honesty she had ever seen from him. Priya Lawson called my attorney last week, he said. I already knew where this was going. He turned the watch over once more in his hands. But I came here because I needed to. He pocketed the watch carefully, the way he had not pocketed anything in the years she had known him, not with ownership, but with something heavier. I'll withdraw the claim and cancel the registration. He walked to his car and pulled out of the lot and drove north on Main Street without looking back. Maya stood on the step until his taillights disappeared. Then she went inside, poured a cup of coffee, and let the quiet settle back around her like something that had always been there and always would be. March in the Tennessee hills is not a gentle thing. It comes in cold and raw, teasing the temperature up into the 40s one afternoon and dropping it back below freezing by morning, the trees holding their bare branches against a sky that can't yet decide what it wants to be. But by the second week, the daffodils were coming up along the church steps, and the oaks on Main Street were showing the first faint green of new growth, and the air had that particular quality, sharp still, but with something underneath it that was new and alive and heading somewhere. Hargrove Clock & Co. opened at 7 every morning and closed when the last person left, which was usually somewhere around 8 in the evening. Eli ran the repair side completely now, a steadiness to his work that had not been there in November, a patience with difficult mechanisms and nervous customers that reminded Maya, without her being able to say exactly why, of reading George's notebook entries from the early years. He studied at the workbench after closing, the certification coursework open beside a composition notebook that was nearly full, and 3 local shops had started routing their more complex repairs to him on the strength of word alone. Maya ran the design business from the upstairs apartment, the work coming in steadily enough that she had started turning down projects that didn't interest her, which was a thing she had not imagined doing 6 months ago in Nashville. She taught the Saturday class, managed the accounts, kept the coffee going, and did, quietly and without announcement, a version of what she had found in George's notebook, the woman whose tank she filled on a cold Thursday afternoon, with a look behind her eyes that Maya recognized. The family whose bill for the clock repair somehow came out to the cost of parts alone, the envelope of grocery money that turned up in a coat pocket, left on the counter for a customer who came in twice without being able to afford what she needed. She did not talk about it. Nobody asked. In February, the Millhaven Courier ran a short piece about the Saturday classes and the shop's reopening. A nonprofit that worked with rural education programs picked up the story and ran it on their newsletter in March. By the end of the month, they had offered the Millhaven Elementary School a 3-year maintenance grant, $18,000, on the basis of what had already happened there without anyone intending it as a demonstration of anything. One evening in late March, near closing, Maya found the last page of George's notebook, a page she had somehow missed every previous reading, written in pencil, with shakier handwriting than anything before it. What I have learned after 25 years in this shop, every person who walks through the door carries an invisible clock. Some are running slow. Some have stopped. Some tick too loudly because they are afraid there isn't enough time. My job was never to fix their clocks. My job was to make them believe that what they carried was worth fixing. Running slow doesn't mean broken. A 4-year-old girl taught me that. It took me 25 years to understand everything she meant. Maya sat with the notebook open on the counter for a long time. Then she set it down beside George's reading glasses, which she had cleaned every morning for 6 months without deciding to, and walked to the display case. She took out the silver pocket watch. A small package had arrived 2 weeks after his visit, shipped overnight from Nashville. The watch wrapped in a square of gray felt with no note inside. That afternoon Brandon had called, his voice quieter than she had ever heard from him. "I sent it back," he said. "It belongs to the place that kept it." He had hung up before she could respond. She held it in both hands, wound the crown slowly, and felt the mainspring take the tension and hold it. She set the watch on her palm. The minute hand moved. Tick. Maya looked out through the clean glass of the shop window at Main Street. In the early dark of a March evening, the lit window of Brennan's Diner. The last of the light going purple above the western ridge. 2 people on the church steps talking with their breath, making small clouds in the cold. She was 26 years old. She had arrived here with $340 and a box of clothes and a deed to a building a lawyer had called negligible. She climbed the stairs to the apartment that smelled like coffee and machine oil and the cedar of an old wool blanket and the specific warmth of a place that had been cared for. She was just getting started. If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with me, hit subscribe and leave a comment below. Which part hit hardest, and where in the world are you watching from?
Something don't look relatable until you understand what they've been quietly doing all along. Maya Calloway lost everything in a single morning. Her job, her engagement, her entire portfolio. What remained was a forgotten shop in a town nobody remembered. Wrote nothing on paper, wrote everything in true. Inside she discovered something no longer could retire, and no contract could claim. A legacy of invisible kindness. A man has spent 25 years fixing clocks and people, not because anyone was watching, not because it paid well, but because he lived that running slow does mean broken. Just one sentence spoken by a 4-year-old girl who didn't know she was changing her life became the philosophy of an entire community. He was the story teacher. Your work is never in your thriller, your concept, or your portfolio. It lives in how you treat the person in front of you. The pylon, the reply long, the process of sublet on someone courteous morning, and the kindness you proud are with the expectation. It does disappear. It's wait, it keep ticking, it come back to you. The neighbor with rubber boots, a mechanic with a toolbox, a lawyer who believe in justice over payment. Don't measure people by the speed, measure them by whether they still trying. The most powerful thing you ever build is a brand. It's a room where people feel worth fixing.